Hi, everyone. Good evening. How are we all? It's so good to be back once again for another Our Whiskey live tasting. And I'm thrilled to see so many names already coming up in the chat. It's lovely to see everybody here today. So, hi, Alistair. Hi, Sarah Rose. Nice to have you here. Hi, Tabby. Roller coaster of a week. Goodness me. I hope you've got both your lovely whiskies lined up and you can put your feet up and relax and have a good time with us this evening. If you are watching, if you're joining in, please do let us know who you are. Just say hi. Love to see who's here and have a bit of a chat. If you are new, then hello. My name is Becky Paskin. I'm the founder of OurWhisky, and I'm a whiskey writer and presenter. And tonight we have two amazing whiskies to taste through. So if you have your OurWhisky tasting pack to have seen what these whiskies are, I'm really excited because I think the majority of you won't have tried them yet. But I was really blown away with both these whiskies. One of them I have a very personal investment in. So in fact, both of them in a way, I'm really excited to share them with you. And we've got two incredible guys from these distilleries here to talk through the whiskies as well. Hi, Nicole. Hi, lovely to see you too. Thanks so much for joining. How's everyone's week been? Tell me a bit about what you've been up to, because month even. It feels like such a long time has gone past since our last tasting. And I mean, in that time, I've been all over the place tasting amazing different whiskies. The new InchDairnie that's come from Beam Suntory, which is a blended Scotch made from a variety of different distilleries around Scotland, from the Beam, Suntory and Edrington portfolios. But it's also been blended by Suntory's Japanese whiskey blenders. So it's a really interesting whiskey, interesting product to pick up. If you do come across InchDairnie, do give it a go. Hi, Claire. Lovely to see you. What else have I tried in the last few weeks? Gosh, I've had a new sample of the new Wireworks come through, so looking forward to trying that, and a few other bits and pieces as well. I just haven't. It's been so busy. There's so many whiskey releases right now. Can't seem to get around everything. Okay, well, listen, without further ado, let's bring in our two guests. I'm delighted to bring them on because, one of them is a returning OurWhisky speaker, and the other is his first time on the show. We're calling this a show? I don't know. We can call it what we want. Let me introduce for you anyway, Ian Palmer, who is the Managing Director of InchDairnie Distillery in Fife. Hi, Ian.
Good evening, Becky. Good evening, everybody.
Thanks so much for joining us today, all the way from France.
Yes. A small variation on Fife. They both start with an F, so we're okay.
We're all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, because I know you're taking a few days out, so it's really lovely that you're here with the beautiful curtains behind you too. Stunning decoration.
I know.
And joining us in what hopefully will not be too confusing a tasting is Ian McAllister, who is the distillery manager at Glen Scotia in Campbeltown. Hi, Ian.
Hello, Becky. Hello, everyone. Hello, Ian. Yeah, thank you very much for having me tonight.
Nice to have you back.
Yeah, it's always good, Becky. It's always lovely to work with you. So yes, thank you very much for the invite. It's absolute pleasure.
Some of you who have been with OurWhisky for a while will know that we tasted Glen Scotia's Festival Edition last year, last May, live from the distillery. Ian and I were cuddled up quite closely, trying to both fit on camera at the time. I don't know if anyone remembers that. That was quite a fun tasting.
Yeah, that was good.
Alistair. Okay, right, here you go, Ian. Alistair says, it was watching the OurWhisky with Becky at Glen Scotia that convinced me to join. They were both rather tipsy, it looked like.
Well, yes. I think Alistair, in our defence, I think it was actually the culmination of 2 days of yeah, absolutely. There was a bit of drinking there, yeah, but it was hard graft too. So a bit of both, maybe a bit of both.
We'd done a few days of festival tastings. A lot of whiskey was tasted, but also we were absolutely exhausted. It was the last ever. It was the last tasting of the festival, the last one we had to do, and we got through it. I think everybody liked it, so that's good. Alice, I'm glad it convinced you to sign up. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Okay, let's get on board with some of the whiskies that we've got tonight. So we've got two amazing whiskies. Both of them are relatively new releases launched within the last couple of months. As you'll see in your tasting packs, we've got InchDairnie's Ryelaw, which is a really interesting, technically a Scotch grain whiskey, but it is a rye whiskey, and Ian Palm's going to talk us through that in just a second. And then also from Glen Scotia, we have this year's festival edition, which has been finished in white port casks, which is such a rarity, not just for Glen Scotia, but in Scotch as a whole. So really looking forward to tasting that. As always, get your glasses ready. Any glass will do. If you've got a Glencairn, that'd be perfect. But if not, any glass will be fine. Grab your whiskies. If you've got any water, please grab some, because I think the Glen Scotia's in the 50s at least. So yeah, let's take it away. Ian Palmer, we're going to start off with the InchDairnie. So please do. Do you want to actually just give a bit of a background as to what InchDairnie is? Because this is a new Scotch whisky distillery. People might not be very aware of it.
I think it's probably a good idea to give some background to exactly who we are and what we are and how we got to where we are today. So InchDairnie Distillery actually came online in December of 2015. So it's a completely new distillery, greenfield site. There was nothing there before. So we decided to build a new distillery. And it was a new distillery where we decided to go right back to the fundamentals of making Scotch whisky, and actually went back into the legislation. And into the legislation in paragraph 3, it's got a great sentence in there. It says that Scotch whisky shall have the flavour and aroma of the materials used, the methods employed, and its maturation. So that's really 3 M's. So that was driving the whole design of the distillery. And we actually then went back and asked ourselves all the questions. Well, why does it have to be the way that it's normally done? So we actually questioned that. And we took a look at the 3 M's and said, well, maybe there's another way of approaching this. And one of the big differences that we built into the distillery, and literally built in, I've got a photograph of where we've got the frame of our mash filter sitting on top of a piece of concrete. And we then built the distillery, physically built it around what is actually a mash filter, which what it basically does what the mash tun will do, but it separates out some of the kind of functions. And in fact, the mash filter is the bit that does the filtering of the mash. And why we chose that is we wanted to work with different cereals, and cereals that weren't actually very easy to work with. And the Ryelaw, which is our new whiskey that we brought out here, and the brand name is Ryelaw, and we were very fortunate in that within a few hundred meters off the distillery, there was a farm called Ryelaw, which was great. We thought, oh, we'll have that, thanks very much. So we decided to make a rye whiskey, but we had to sort of say, well, what do you mean by a rye whiskey? So the only kind of piece of guidance that we had was the American definition for rye whiskey, which said 51% of the mash bill must be rye. So it's not a malt whiskey, despite the fact the rye is actually malted. So it's malted rye and malted barley in the mash bill. But what we wanted to do was not to kind of repeat what the Americans have done, because that would be insulting to them. That, we wanted to make our own rye whiskey. We didn't want to do a me too rye whiskey. We wanted our own, and we wanted it to have really something that's very true to its Scottish roots. And the important bits of that is that the grain is all malted, but when you mash it, you actually filter it. Now, in a traditional grain distillery, you don't filter it. The whole mash goes into the fermentation, but not in a malt distillery. So we said, well, with the mash filter, we can actually filter the mash. It's really, really difficult. If you want wallpaper paste, get yourself some rye, mix it with hot water, and you've got wallpaper paste. It's extremely viscous, but fortunately, the mash filter, which is like a mechanical filtration process, gives us the clear wort. And that's what is one of the major differences between grain whiskey and malt whiskey. It's the kind of the very clear wort. There's no solids in there. And that actually impacts on the flavor profile that you've got in your glass. Because what we've got is malted barley and we've got malted rye. So those are two pieces of the flavors that you've got. And it's rye that's connected very closely to its Scottish heritage. After it's fermented, it's then distilled in two pot stills, exactly like a malt distillery. So it's in two pot stills, but the wash still is the normal wash still, but the spirit still is a Lowman still. It's our version of the Lowman still. We've actually taken a look at the design of the old Lowman still and kind of bent it and twisted it to make it fit what we wanted it to do. So the Lowman still is a pot still, but in the neck, just like the original Lowman still, you've actually got plates. And in here, and on the photograph that Becky has put up, you can see the sight glasses into each of the 6 plates that are in the neck. And that gives us a lot of reflux in the spirit still. And that gives us a lot of lighter flavors because the heavier flavors will be taken out by the actual filters the plates, in the neck of the still. Now, all of that is kind of building up into a flavor profile that actually is quite different from anything else that you will have actually experienced. You've got 53% malted rye, 47% malted barley. So you're going to get some of the malt whiskey flavors. You're going to get some of the rye spicy flavors that are going to come through. Now, the rye spice flavors are being toned down because it's malted rye and not unmalted rye that needs to be cooked. So you've got 2 pieces of the jigsaw. There's actually 3 in total. So you got the malt flavors, the rye flavors, and then comes the third flavor. Again, we took a look at the American definition for rye whiskey, and it says it must be matured in new oak casks. So bang comes in the third element of the flavor profile. It's not ex-bourbon casks. It's actually new American oak casks. So the wood flavors come straight through. And in fact, that was one of our concerns. And the concern was, how long do you leave it to mature? Because if we left it for too long, you would have lost the other 2 flavors and all you would have got was spirit and wood. And we didn't want that. We wanted a balance of flavor so that we've got the youngish malts spirit flavors, the rye spicy flavors, and the wood flavors without one over dominating the other into there. So you've got like a 3-part story in the glass. And to give you an idea of the impact of the wood, this color, it only comes from the wood. There is no caramel, there is no chill filtration, none of it. It's all coming from the wood. So you can see just simply looking at the bottle how strong the wood impact has actually been, and it is quite strong. So that's why we actually chose to disgorge and bottle it. So this was distilled in 2017 and disgorged in 2022. So it's 5 years old. And in those 5 years, the spirit has worked really hard with the wood, but we had to be sure that you could still get the malt flavors and you could still get the rye flavors into there. So that's kind of where we are with the flavor profile that's coming into there. So I see somebody's interested in the grain spirit. Yes, it's a grain spirit because it's not a malt spirit. That's the definition. It's a bit of a poor answer to a perfectly reasonable question. So for me, and the problem I've got with the grain whiskey category is it's actually what I describe as the sin bin for the awkward squad. It's because it doesn't fit into anything else, so therefore it's grain whiskey.
It's everything else, isn't it? It's everything besides single malt.
Yeah, and to me, it does a great disservice to a great product. You know, and I think that's wrong, and I think we need to kind of do something about that, and I think to help the consumer to be able to decide what they're going to be drinking and be able to experiment with some things. And I think this whole grain whiskey piece needs a bit of sorting out, because there's a great product out there. I mean, I was at Invergordon Distillers centuries ago, and we brought out the 10-year-old Invergordon single. Great product. Timing wasn't very good. People went, "What's that?" No idea. But it was a great product nonetheless. It was a true grain whiskey. It was in the traditional sense, but Ryelaw is very much a rye whiskey, but we're having to call it a grain whiskey instead. So
there's a few Sorry, Ian.
So I think if you were to take a look at the actual, just on the nose, you tend to get, I think, at the very beginning of it, very little of the spice. It's in the background into there. To me, when you start to nose it, first of all, you do tend to get the wood coming through. You tend to get the vanilla. And I think you tend then to get a little bit of the kind of the malt spirit. I think it's only when you actually try the spirit itself does some of the spice begin to come through. And I think that is because we've used malted rye as opposed to the traditional cooked ryes that have come through into there. Sorry, Becky, I spoke over you.
No, I spoke over you. I'm sorry. I wanted to say there's a couple of really interesting things that you raised there. One being the category of grain whiskey being a catch-all for any other grain that's used to make whiskey in Scotland aside from malted barley, which is interesting because I don't know if anyone watching along has ever tasted a grain whiskey that's made from wheat and a grain whiskey that's made from corn, and the nose on both of them is quite different, and you can tell the base material. Now to categorize both of those as exactly the same product, I think it's based in tradition, because grain whiskey was never really made to drink on its own. It was always just made as a filling for blends, the backbone of blended Scotch. So it didn't really matter what it was made from. It's down to yield rather than flavour. But I think it's really interesting when you do nose these whiskies, and you do get a sense of what that base grain is. Do you think that we'll start to see a move, Ian McAllister as well, towards a more wider definition that does encompass different grain varieties within grain whiskey?
I always feel that the category description, and I'm a great supporter of the category description, because it's done the whiskey industry a lot of good. If you were to walk into a shop and this bottle says it's a single malt Scotch whiskey, take it a step further, it's a Campbeltown single malt Scotch whiskey, you can buy that bottle knowing with huge certainty the contents of that bottle is precisely that. So I think fundamentally the category description process and the system and the laws behind it is absolutely spot on until you come to grain whiskey. Because then it doesn't help at the moment. And I think that you're right. It used to be, I mean, my background is grain whiskey. I spent 25 years making nothing but grain whiskey. And we used to make it from maize, and we used to make it from wheat. And we used to switch it around, whichever way it would be. But I think what's another piece that's dropped into it is actually there is a grain whiskey out there that's made from 100% malted barley. So, but it's actually distilled in a column still and not in a pot still. So, like I said, it's the catch-all for the awkward squad, and it's quite interesting in there. If you go to America, you get a wheated bourbon, which actually is a rye whiskey, but the definition is turned for wheat. So the definition for rye, more than 51% rye. A wheated bourbon, guess what? More than 51% wheat. Now, to me, that consumer goes to the shop and says, I want a grain whiskey made from wheat. Well, there you go. There's your answer. At the moment in the UK, you can't do that. And I think it's disappointing.
And what the other thing I love about Ryelaw is, because you very kindly took me around the distillery very recently, which for me was a kind of a full circle, because I was writing about InchDairnie back when you first opened for ScotchWhisky.com. So to finally see it in all its glory was just amazing for me to go and see what you've built, and to taste Ryelaw, a whiskey that I know you've been working on for a very, very long time. And I tasted it throughout its maturation process too. But what I find quite interesting about it is, although you say it's a rye whiskey which takes some inspiration from America, but mostly from Scotland, and it really is a Scottish rye whiskey. For me, it tastes like a Scottish grain whiskey, like you would expect from a Scottish grain: light, vanilla, fudgy, fruitiness, but then just this subtle kick of rye. It's really subtle, and it was interesting that you said the malting process takes out the spiciness of the rye. Is that right? And is that why it's not got so much punch to it?
I think there is a number of reasons as to why. I mean, there's rye whiskies out there that actually are more like a Vindaloo, right? So you got to sit down and you got to have a firm grip of the table and then take a mouthful and go, right, I've survived that. Great, fantastic. Thinking, no, that's not where we wanted to be. And I think that what we were looking for was breadth of flavour. And I think that malting the rye had two impacts. One is actually easier to manage through the mashing process, but it does tone it down a little bit and actually allows the other rye bread flavors to come through. I mean, we've gone through a lot of the examination of the flavors, and there is a lot of cereal notes coming through. Cereal notes that are not the malted barley cereal flavors. They are the rye flavors that you would get in rye bread. But I think that if you didn't malt it, you wouldn't get them. You would just get nothing but the rye spice. And it's just this boof, bang. And I'm thinking, no, that's not what we want to do. And I think does it make it a tikka masala? Yes, it's closer to a tikka masala than a Vindaloo. I'm beginning now to regret I even mentioned this concept, but there we go. But I think what we wanted was breadth of flavour. And we didn't want the wood to over-dominate, we didn't want the spice to over-dominate it, and we didn't want it to be kind of a messed up malt whiskey. It needed to be something else that was in there.
This question in from Nicole: are the casks toasted? Because the colour is a really rich colour after 5 years, yes. But these are new American oak casks.
Yes, the new American oak casks, and the huge concern over American oak cask, new ones, is it over-dominates. And this is 5 years old, and we're looking, well, what can we do about getting something that's going to be a bit older? And what we wanted to then do is, well, let's take a look at the oak itself. And there are two things you can play with oak. You can switch to European oak, which has got a much lower tannin impact, but you've also got, well, should be toasted as opposed to char it. Also, when we got this from the cooperage, it had written on the casks char number 3. So, Andrew, why did you give me char number 3? And to which Andrew said, well, that's what the Americans use. And I'm thinking, well, if you give me char number 3, at a guess, there's at least a char 1 and a char 2, and maybe a char 4. And we go, yes, there's a char 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we've experimented on those chars, but we've also taken it down into the toasted bit. If you toast it, you're not disrupting the wood. If you don't disrupt the wood, you won't get as much as the wood flavors coming in. And that's what we wanted to do with the aged variant. So we wanted to allow the whiskey to do its own maturation thing without the wood impact coming in. So, yes, we have some toasted. It's not part of the current mix at the moment, and we are looking at that and potentially for the 8, the 10, and the 12, it could actually be toasted oak. And it could be French oak. It could be Hungarian oak. These are the sorts of things that can impact on the flavour and allow it to age a little bit further. Nobody has written the book on rye Scotch whisky. So you are kind of, we'll try this and we'll try that, give this a go, give that a go, and see how it works. In theory, you should go from A to B. Occasionally you end up in Z. But if you don't try it, you'll not find out you finished up in Z. And maybe you finished up in E, which is quite close to B, so be it.
It's all good. As long as you end up somewhere and not in a sticky porridge mess.
Yes, no.
It's all good. You're all good. Thank you so much, Ian. Let us know what you think of the InchDairnie Ryelaw in the comments. You might have caught as well at the beginning of Ian's speech about the distillery that they are a multi-grain distillery. So there are other products coming out from InchDairnie in the not too distant future. That's right?
Yes, yeah. We have we've got what we call the Prinlaw's collection. The Prinlaw's collection is things that we do for 1 week every year. Completely nuts. We've got malted oats. We've got malted wheat. We've done, a terrible word this, but we've done sour mash, which actually is in Scotland, we don't call it sour mash, we call it backset. So we've got some of that coming along. We've done a 6-row barley. And last year, Scott did a Munich malt. It was kind of a roasted malt. And the wort that came off the mash filter was an absolutely first-class pint of Guinness. It was as black as Guinness. So we've got those sorts of other things coming along. And yes, we've got our East Coast peated malt coming along, which is one of our standard products. And ultimately, the InchDairnie single malt around about 2029 before that will hit the shelves. Gosh,
well, looking forward to seeing all of these innovations coming out. You and Scott, Scott Snedden, he's the distillery manager, master distiller, distillery manager.
He's the distillery manager, yeah.
Very, very busy people. Looking forward to seeing some of those products. If anyone's got any other questions for Ian in the meantime, then hold on to them for now. We'll come back and talk to Ian P a bit later after we've dived into the Glen Scotia. But it sounds like the Ryelaw has gone down really well. People are now wanting Indian takeaways, Ian, so this is what you've done. You made everyone really hungry for a curry. I'm glad I ate before we started, otherwise I'd be on the phone to a takeaway as well. Really lovely to taste that. Thank you so much. We're going to move next on to a completely different whiskey, and this is a single malt from Glen Scotia in Campbeltown. This is the second time we've had Glen Scotia on. We tasted their festival edition last year. The lovely Ian McAllister and I sat down together and tasted that edition. And the interesting thing is last year's festival, Ian and I put together something called the Whiskey Experiment. Has anyone come across this? Has anyone seen it? Did anyone come to the festival and watch us do this? Do let us know. Because it was an experience, a real experience, wasn't it?
It was good fun, really good fun. You know, it's I think it's something that's kind of thought provoking, isn't it? You know, it gets you to stop and think about whiskey in a different context. So yeah, it's brilliant concept.
It's an interesting concept. I can't take credit for it. Glen Scotia very kindly invited me to come and pair up with Ian and do a few masterclasses at the festival last year, and we created a tasting which was kind of rooted in some of the research by Professor Charles Spence, all based on this idea of neurogastronomy. So how our sights and smells and the light around us, our atmosphere, the people we're with, will change our perception of how a whiskey tastes, which is super fascinating and sounds like some kind of hippy-dippy nonsense. But we decided to conduct a very serious whiskey experiment in Glen Scotia's warehouse. We transformed it into a living room, which was so bizarre. The most random place to have done a whiskey tasting. And we had people listening to music. We had a silent disco. We were looking at shapes. We would change the color in the way. It was amazing. And it went down so well that we decided to share it with the world, with all of you guys. So Glen Scotia decided to create a whiskey experiment that you can do at home and put it on this year's festival edition bottle. So I don't know if anyone's got a bottle, whether they've bought this already. I think I saw somebody had bought it but not opened it yet. Now this is it. Thank you. Mine's over there. I should have put it over. This is the one. Now, I'm going to put a link to the whiskey experiment in the comments in a second, because what I really wanted to do was to bring up the video so we could taste the whiskey together and then do it together. Unfortunately, I couldn't get all the videos to work. Technology was doing my head in today. But what I would definitely recommend you do, we'll go through the whiskey tasting just now, but keep a drop. And when I post this link later on, go and shut yourself in a dark room when the sun sets a bit and just give it a go, because it actually works, which is so bizarre, Ian, don't you think?
It's funny that when you mentioned that we had the living room and the warehouse, and I thought we did actually. It just seems it seems quite. You think back, wow, what we're thinking on, but it was absolutely wonderful. It really, and I think it did open a lot of people's minds. And same in Edinburgh. I think Edinburgh was even another level. It really engaged with so many people, and it. It's just, it strips back the norm, doesn't it? It strips back everything you know and you understand about whiskey, and it really, it just makes you think. Just think for a minute.
And it's one of those. One of the things we also took this to Edinburgh, and we took over the Picture House cinema at the Scotsman, and which is one of the best places I've ever done a whiskey tasting. I don't know about you, Ian. It was absolutely stunning. Go and have a look on my Instagram page for some pictures, because it was just the most beautiful setting. And one of the things I mentioned to people was, sometimes you might go to a bar or you're around a friend's house and you taste the whiskey and you think, oh my God, that's absolutely amazing. So you buy a bottle, or maybe it's on a distillery tour, you buy a bottle, you take it home and it doesn't quite taste the same. It's maybe lacking in something. It didn't quite have the same punch as when you tasted it the first time. And that's down to this idea of neurogastronomy, that your environment will play in your senses, your perception of flavour. The liquid in the glass hasn't changed. You haven't changed. Your environment is the thing that's changed. And that's what's so interesting. So the whiskey experiment, when you come to it, do have a play, because it's super fascinating. Yeah. For now, though, whiskey in glasses, let's actually talk about this, because it's a stunning whiskey. Ian, can you tell us a bit about this year's festival edition?
Yeah, absolutely. So this year, and I've got to think what year with the festival editions. Yes, so 2023, 11-year-old. So it's a wonderful one. It's 11 year. Yeah, good, well done. You bet me to it, Becky. Right. 11-year-old. So it's basically, again, it's that first fill bourbon. And I say first fill bourbon cask influence, lightly peated. So the peating level for me from that age was going to be about 17.4 parts per million, at the start of the process. And yeah, it's basically had 12 months finish in that white port cask. So 54.7%. And so all the, the flavour profiles, what you would expect from, the distillery, Campbeltown, that bourbon influence there, that bourbon background really enhancing that flavour profile. But yet, historically, we've got that wonderful association with these casks. White port, probably something a little bit rarer, even around these parts, through the annals of time. But yeah, you would have obviously had these casks. So. And I think specifically about this one, Becky, I think it's really, it really It stays true to its distillery character there. So the white port cask, if you like, doesn't dominate, doesn't cover that flavour profile too much. It really just complements it and it enhances it. So yeah, again, it's obviously it's a lovely dram, and it's been well received. So
I think it's one of the best yet, in my opinion. It's got this like the typical the Glen Scotia DNA, that lovely fruit, a little bit of that salinity going on, but and with the peatiness as well. It's not overpowering. It's very lightly peated. This nice puff of fresh smoke. Drained cleaner on a drizzly day. Wait, what are you talking about, Chris? Have I just completely missed what you just said there? It's a bottle of liqueur. What I don't know what reference that's into, but sorry, I saw Drizzly Day in Britain, and I thought, oh yes, it is a little bit kind of like petrichor kind of note to it. That kind of like rain on a hot tarmac pavement. It just has that kind of like nice light minerality to it, but also, and I don't know whether this is from the port casks or where it comes from, but it's the stone fruit, the nectarine, the peach, but then all of the lovely forest fruit with quite jammy fruits into it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're going to get that out of these the port casks. You're going to get slightly more of that, as I say, that there's like white peach. There's definitely stone fruit, but you still get that what you would expect from a sherry, a PX type cask. You still get a certain amount of molasses and light. It's obviously in a lighter semblance, but you still get that light prunes and figs, etc., which is slightly more delicate. And I think that's how it works, because you would expect that from Campbeltown. Is it more like a Campbeltown whiskey? Well, who knows? But it's really nothing dominates. That's what you want. You mentioned the peat there, so the peat should always be there. Especially in Campbeltown. You're getting that smokiness rather as a peatiness, but yet you've got to have that outstanding flavour profile. You've really got to have flavour there from these bourbon casks. So once you bring everything together, then it should do its own talking, I guess.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I love about Glen Scotia as well, is you do have all these different facets to the distillery because this festival edition, with all of its like bright fruitiness, but then the lovely dried fruits, the figs, the jammy notes, the touch of smoke, it's a world apart from something like Victoriana, which is one of my all-time favourite classic whiskies. I think everybody has to try Victoriana at some point, if you can get hold of it, because it's like everyone wants a slice of that.
No. It's not that long ago, as Ian said, it's certainly, it's all very well putting it in the shelf, but it's getting people to take it off the shelf. I think it's it's a secret. So yeah, we've obviously it's for us, and I guess for a distillery, it's been here since 1832. It's quite a new concept when people want to buy your whiskey, so it's quite a welcome concept, but it's certainly wonderful now. And we, as you say, Becky, we're obviously, we struggle now to keep up with demand, so it's good. It's good.
Yeah. Not bad for a wee distillery in Campbeltown, Ian.
Absolutely. It's
sorry.
It's good. Yeah, it's good to see it doing well. It really is. As I say, it's been here for a long time, so yeah, I'm proud of it. It's doing good. It's doing good.
And how long have you been distillery manager for?
Oh, I'll be coming on for 16 years now. So yes, it's it's amazing where the time goes. It's unbelievable. So it's been it really has. From the first day I walked in to the place, it's been quite a journey. So yeah.
And you're Campbeltown born and bred, aren't you?
Yes, for my sins. Yes, I am. I've been. I've been here pretty much most of my working life, apart from a brief spell away. But yeah, I've been here, so known Glen Scotia for a long time, even before that. So yeah, when I started here, it was I mentioned them before, Davy and Jim. So Jim was the still man who's since retired. Davy was the mash man who I think Davy's been here, well, I think over 100 years now. Davy's been here. So he's been here an incredible length of time. And yeah, and it's guys like these, it really, makes it what it is. So, it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful, obviously, share it with them.
And it's one of those distilleries that, genuinely, I mean, look, I travel around quite a lot of distilleries and write about a lot of distilleries in my job, but it's one of those places that genuinely has this kind of sense of family. Like, you're all there working together, we all join together, and it's almost like, because Campbeltown used to be like the center of whiskey distilling. How many distilleries was it in its heyday?
It's up to 36 different distilleries here. 21 operating at any one time, Becky. So.
Yeah, so a huge number of distilleries, but now there's only at the moment there's only 3 distilleries, and I feel like tell me if I'm wrong here, but it's almost that small close knit community within Campbeltown itself, which isn't a large place at all. That Glen Scotia has been going on for so long. You've really created this lovely, welcoming family environment within the distillery team.
Yeah, you're right. The team is wonderful. And obviously everyone's joined along the way, because from the initial 3 of us here, we're 13 of us now, which is still quite small, but everyone does fantastically well. And we know each other really well, and yeah, but we just get on with what we love doing, and everyone's really passionate about it. They're loyal. And it's just, yourself, you've been here, so you pretty much know everyone anyway, Becky. So yeah, they're a great team, and obviously adding to Campbeltown itself, it was one of these, I could never understand why someone wouldn't want to come to Campbeltown and build a distillery, because I think, wow, you've got a ready-made history here. You could do so much with that, and a different, I guess, different guys, or whatever. So I thought, this is a place to come, and there seems to be slightly more interest in coming to Campbeltown now, and obviously, building a distillery or distilleries. So, and I think that's wonderful. I really do, and I think it's obviously, it just shows the health of the whiskey industry, not even in Scotland, but globally. It's wonderful to see. So it's come on so far. Long may it continue.
What effect do you think more distilleries in Campbeltown is going to have on Campbeltown itself? Do you think this is going to bring a lot more money into the centre? Because this is a place which historically has been a very wealthy, very vibrant fishing town, and has perhaps fallen on harder times in recent years.
Yep.
What effect do you think these new distilleries, the new money that's coming in, is going to have on the town?
I think it obviously, again, for the whiskey industry itself, it obviously, I guess, it bolsters Campbeltown, doesn't it? Campbeltown's always had it's had that reputation, whether it's been good, bad, or indifferent in the whiskey industry. But it's always had that reputation. So I think that's only a good thing. As you said, Campbeltown is probably one of the most remotest towns in mainland United Kingdom. So all that, all that helps. It creates jobs. For younger people that don't necessarily want to go away, like I didn't, when I was that age. So it pretty much, it gives you that opportunity. Whether you want to work in a distillery or engineering or sales or marketing, it's not just one dimensional. That's the beauty of a distillery. There's so many different facets and opportunities that you could undertake. So it's only a good thing. It really is only a good thing. And Campbeltown itself, although it's the end of a long road, but yet you've got quite a good harbour here. Water resources are good for the distilleries. So there's a lot of plus points for sure, Becky.
No, it's actually just, obviously crosses my mind the fact that both of you have got more than just your name in common. You're both running distilleries which are in regions that are starting to have a bit of a regeneration, as it were, because Fife as well is becoming. How many distilleries do you have in the region of Fife now, EMP?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus Cameron Bridge. I think there was a gap between 1935 and 2010 when all there was in Fife was Cameron Bridge Distillery. The one in Auchtermuchty, I think, was 1935 or 1932. It was the last one to close. And then, of course, the first one was Daft Mill. And then 3 of them came along, just like blooming number 13 bus. So you had Lindores, Kingsbarns, and InchDairnie. We just thought, tell you what, let's just build distilleries together. And then, of course, you've got Eden Mill, which is kind of, well, it says it's relocating. I think it's moved 20 feet, I think, but it's kind of still in exactly that same place, which, was the location for a grain distillery, interestingly. So, at Garbridge there, it was, that was one of the Higgs and Steens distilleries. So it's actually on the site of one of those. And, Fife had got a huge distilling heritage, but it just disappeared. It just simply disappeared, and now it's come back. We're surrounded by good malting barley, loads of water, and what we've actually described Ryelaw not as a lowland single grain, but as a Fife single grain Scotch whisky. Because Fife actually is so, it's not quite like Campbeltown, because Campbeltown really is a peninsula. There's no question of that. But so actually is Fife. And because you've got the Firth of Tay to the north, North Sea to the east, and the Firth of Forth to the south. So geographically, we've actually got a very distinctive, heritage and a very distinctive identity. Very similar, but not quite to the same extent as Campbeltown, I'd have to say. I've travelled the road to Campbeltown, and jings, that's a long road.
The long and winding road.
Oh, it certainly is. Yes, it's a long road. Yes, which I can't say the same about Fife. Fife, I can't say the same. No.
It's a lot easier to get in and out of Fife, for sure.
Yes.
Although flying into Campbeltown or out of Campbeltown is much, much, much easier. The tiniest aeroplane I've ever been on in my entire life.
That's right. It really is. As I say, it's. I think there's about 13 passengers on it. So really small.
The flight attendant, the flight crew is the pilot. Yeah. It's the same person. He'll just come up and tap me on the shoulder if you've got a problem.
That's right. That's right. He actually does say that. Just give me a shout if you get a problem. I think.
Do you know what? I'll leave you to fly in the plane if that's all right. I don't need a bag of peanuts that bad.
Just you concentrate on what you're doing. We're fine. Doesn't matter what happens here. You concentrate on what you're doing.
Yeah, if you're scared of flying, it might not be the best route for you, but otherwise it's a quite lengthy but very pretty drive all the way around. Not Raymond and around. Yeah. We're coming towards the end of tonight's tasting, so if anyone's got any questions for Ian P or Ian McA, whose phone is that?
Not guilty. No.
That was yes. Sorry, I had a phone ringing there. I don't know why, and then I just get a text message from Bill White, my boss from Loch Lomond. So
is he watching you now? It's like, smile more, Ian. Come on.
It probably is. That's it. So kind of get peace. That's it. So yeah.
So what? So what do you have planned for next year's festival, Ian McAllister?
Well, yes, obviously, you know, a lot of that we're looking at, you know, just along the same lines again, you know, keeping it interesting, but really just trying to tie in the history of Campbeltown association with interesting casks and calling on that, you know, that spirit profile that we've got. So, you know, we're into the realms now of, that was obviously 11-year-old, but you know, a lot of that stock we've laid down really since about 2013 onward, you know, when we really started to expand production. So yeah, we're in a good place, you know, we really are. You know, we've got limited stock, but yeah, we've still got stock. So yeah, we've obviously got the seasonal releases to come out too. So that'll be the September, October time, more October time. So yeah, they've obviously got to come out too. So we're keeping us busy.
Yeah. How's my cask doing? Are you still looking into it?
Yeah, I actually took a wee sample out of that, and it's sitting in my living room. So I'm going to have a wee look at that actually this week for you. So I'll let you know how we're doing. So
please do. This is a cask we drew for the Whiskey Experiment, the living room in a warehouse for last year's festival, and it was remind me what it was.
Oh, I was going to be impressed with you there, Becky.
No, it was no. Is it bourbon that was put into Festival PX?
It was. I've got to think myself. So it was a 2012. It was a lightly peated, and it went into a first fill Oloroso. So it's in that Oloroso.
Oloroso, but it's been in the Oloroso for a wee while now.
It's been in a long time, yeah.
It's 4 years now.
Aye, it's a lot longer than your normal, you know, your Glen Scotia finish. So yeah, it's quite interesting. It really is quite interesting. So different.
Yeah. Well, listen, Nick and I have got some big plans for that cask. So yeah, please, thank you for keeping an eye on it for me.
Absolutely.
And all nice. And those of you watching along at home may get the opportunity to try it at some point. You never know. We'll see. Has anyone got any other questions at all coming in for either Ian Palmer or Ian McAllister? Do let us know. Alistair, I'm really disappointed that somebody told you early on that you wouldn't like Glen Scotia. I find that ridiculous that anyone would tell anyone they wouldn't like a certain type of whiskey. Unless some, you know, specifically said, you know, you're not going to like good whiskey. They probably told you that because they wanted to save it for themselves. Is what it is. I find that strange. Oh, sorry. Here's a question for God, Tabby. What is your favourite curry?
I really wish I hadn't started this one now. That was clearly a mistake from my front. Sorry about that, Becky. I seem to have derailed the whole thing completely.
This is a whiskey tasting, not a whiskey, and not curry tasting.
Curries. No, nothing wrong with it.
No. It certainly wouldn't be a Vindaloo for me, that's for sure. Something nice, something a little bit calm, I'd have to say. I'm actually scrolling through a number of the comments that are coming through, and there are some questions. And there's one here from Chris, and is rye really hard to mill and mash, as people say? Yes, it is. But we actually hammer mill it, so it doesn't go through a roller mill. So actually milling it's quite easy from us, I think. Another one here from Spirit Bomb. I've heard that oat is the worst grain to work with. No, it's not, actually. Oats in a traditional mash tun sometimes is actually used as a filtration aid. Some of the brewers, some of the smaller brewers who put in what they would call adjuncts, which is unmalted cereal, and they want to filter it through a louter tun, will actually add oat husk to help filter it, because it just gives you more husk to push it through. So actually oats was easy to filter. The trouble is when you milled it just became a huge volume. So we had to cut back the amount of oats that we used because the grist case couldn't cope with it because it just exploded into like puffballs. It was is there. And somebody was also asking here about the the toasting. No, it's not toasted. It's all charred casks. So, and 100% of it's all charred casks. So, I think those were some of the questions.
How would you describe the flavour profile of oat spirit and matured oat spirit?
Very creamy. It's very creamy. It's lots of mouthfeel and a huge cereal note to it. And that actually is probably because of the hammer milling. When we hammer mill it, it's broken into a flour. Now, when you would roller mill it, you want to keep the husk intact because it's the husk that is actually doing your filtering, which means the husk doesn't go through into the fermentation. But if you hammer mill it, you'll get a lot more husk passing through into the fermentation. So you tend to get a bit more furfural, as we would call it, one of those esters. And oddly enough, it actually tastes like cereal. So we got and because oats has got a lot of husk, a lot of it passed through into the fermentation. So if you really wanted a very, very cereal flavored spirit, hammer mill the oats and put it through a mash filter. It's very cereal, but it does give you a lot of creaminess to it, and it's got a lot of mouth coat to it into there. It's a problem to handle, but from a filtration point of view, it's easier to filter than barley.
We don't see a lot of oats used in whiskey generally as a rule, aside from Irish single pot still. Sometimes they'll use a proportion of oats within their mash bill, but apart from that, it's quite rare to see oats. I think it's Koval, I think in the US, do a 4 grain. I think they use oats in there. But,
I think that if you were using making it with a traditional pot still recipe where you've got unmalted barley, which could be quite difficult to filter, the addition of the oats would actually help to create that filtration bed. So I think kind of the tradition to use oats in pot still where you had the unmalted cereal probably came from the filtration problems that they were having.
Yeah, I can imagine so. All right, guys, thank you so much for this evening's tasting. Isla's come over, wanting to make an appearance, just because it's the end. She's like, right, I need my mama back now. Thank you so much for joining us for this tasting, Ian Palmer from InchDairnie and then Ian McAllister from Glen Scotia. Really appreciate having you here, showing us your whiskies. It seems like everyone tasting along has had such a great night as well. So thank you very, very much. Thank you as always for everyone for your support for our whiskey and for joining in on our tastings. And hopefully I'll get to see you all again very soon. But for now, good night. Enjoy the rest of your week and take care. Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, everyone.